If you want to get a handle on how our modern world was really built, I mean, everything from the art in museums to how we even think about science, there's one period you just have to look at.
Oh, definitely. The
The
Renaissance.
Renaissance. It was just this explosive, kind of chaotic, but unbelievably creative time in history.
It really is the hinge of modern history, isn't it? It starts around the 14th century in Europe, and it's the moment that really marks the break from the Middle Ages.
And the name itself, Renaissance, it means rebirth, right?
Exactly, and that name tells you everything you need to know
Hmm?
about what was happening. It was a rebirth of old ideas.
So that's our goal today, to break down what made this rebirth happen, what was being rediscovered, and why did it all kick off right then and there?
Well, the main thing was this passionate, renewed interest in the ideas and the art and just the wisdom of ancient Greece and Rome.
Okay.
For centuries, everything was dominated by religious thought. But then scholars started finding and translating these ancient manuscripts that had been, well, basically forgotten.
And it wasn't random that it started in Italy, was it? In places like Florence and Rome?
Not at all. There are two big reasons for that: location and money.
Right.
First, Italy was the home of the Roman Empire, so the ruins in the old texts were literally right there.
Mm.
But I think more importantly, these cities were just booming with trade.
So a lot of money was flowing in.
A ton of money.
Yeah.
And that wealth was spent by powerful families like the Medicis in Florence on, well, on amazing new art, new buildings, and on funding the scholars who were doing all this research.
Okay, so trade gives you the money, and ancient Rome gives you the inspiration. But the engine driving it all, the big idea behind the Renaissance, that was humanism.
Without a doubt, if you're going to understand this period, you have to understand humanism. It was a complete shift in thinking.
How so?
Before the Renaissance, the focus was almost totally on theology, on, God and the afterlife.
Everything was seen through a religious filter.
Precisely. And humanism,
Hmm.
it just changed the focus.
Yeah.
It shifted it from the divine to the value and the potential of the individual human being right here on Earth.
So it wasn't anti-religious, just pro-human.
That's a perfect way to put it. It gave people permission to celebrate human achievements in art, in science, in literature, everything.
That sounds like a pretty big deal. How did that change things for people day to day, like in school?
Oh, it completely changed what a good education was supposed to be. The humanists created a curriculum based on what they called the humanities.
So history, poetry, things like that.
Exactly. History, poetry, grammar, philosophy. The goal wasn't just to prepare you for a religious life. It was to make you a good citizen, an active member of society.
They weren't just training monks anymore. They were trying to create leaders.
Yes. The ultimate goal was to produce what we call the Renaissance man, a well-rounded person who was good at a lot of different things: sports, music, writing, you name it.
And that's really the key takeaway here, isn't it? This way of thinking encouraged people to ask questions, to rely on their own observations instead of just accepting what they were told.
Right. And that skepticism, that focus on evidence, is the direct ancestor of the scientific revolution that came next.
Okay, so you've got this new focus on individual thought, you've got all this rediscovered knowledge, but you need a way to spread it.
You do. And that brings us to maybe the single biggest invention of the age:
The printing press.
the printing press. Invented by Johannes Gutenberg in the middle of the 15th century. You really can't overstate how huge this was.
So before Gutenberg, how were books made?
By hand. A scribe had to sit and copy every single word. Imagine how long that took.
A single book could take, what, months? A year?
A year or even more for a big one.
Hmm.
So books were incredibly rare and expensive. Only, kings or the church could really afford them. Knowledge was basically locked up.
And the printing press just blew that wide open. How did the tech actually work?
It used something called movable metal type. So instead of carving a whole page out of wood, Gutenberg made individual letters out of metal.
Ah, so you could rearrange them to make any page you wanted.
Exactly. You'd set the letters in a frame, ink them up, and then press them onto paper. You could make hundreds of copies in the time it took a scribe to make one.
And what did that do to the price?
It crashed. The cost of books dropped by like 80 or 90%. Suddenly, merchants, craftsmen, regular educated people could afford to buy them.
Which means more people learn to read.
Literacy rates shot up. And this is how all those radical new ideas, humanism, new science, maps of new worlds, this is how they spread across Europe so fast. Ideas could now travel faster than a person could.
When you think of the Renaissance, though, the first thing that usually comes to mind is the art. And the change there was just, it was dramatic.
It was. And it was all driven by that humanist desire to capture the reality of the human experience. Artists wanted their work to look real.
And they developed new techniques to do that.
They did. The biggest one, the most revolutionary, was perspective. It's basically a mathematical trick artists use to make a flat painting look like it has 3 dimensions.
So it creates depth. It makes you feel like you could just walk right into the painting.
That's it, exactly. They use things like a vanishing point on the horizon, so things in the background look smaller and farther away, just like in real life. It grounded the art in reality.
And they got really serious about making the people look real, too, right?
Oh, yeah. They became obsessed with anatomy. Artists like Leonardo da Vinci would actually dissect human bodies, which was very controversial, even illegal sometimes.
Wow.
But they had to. They needed to understand how muscles and bones worked to paint bodies that looked like they could actually move.
And they were using new kinds of paint, too.
Yes, oil paints became really popular. They dry slowly so you can blend colors and create these really rich, detailed textures that you just couldn't get before.
You see that in the work of artists like Michelangelo or Da Vinci, that use of light and shadow to make things feel solid and emotional.
That's a technique called chiaroscuro. That strong contrast between light and dark. It adds drama. Da Vinci also used fumato, which is sort of a blurring of the edges, to create a smoky, mysterious feeling.
And it wasn't just religious scenes anymore, was it?
No. They still painted those, of course, but they also started painting portraits of wealthy people, scenes from mythology, and even just everyday life.
That same spirit then moves into buildings and statues.
Absolutely. Architects just turned their backs on the pointy Gothic style and looked straight back to ancient Rome. They started using columns and arches and huge balanced domes.
Like the one on Florence Cathedral.
The perfect example. It's all about balance and mathematical proportion. And sculptors were doing the same thing. They wanted to capture the human body in motion.
Michelangelo's David comes to mind. It looks so alive.
It does. He studied muscles and anatomy so he could carve that tension into the marble. And wealthy people would pour money into public art like that. Fountains, town squares. It was a sign of pride for their city.
So, if the artists were using observation to paint the world realistically, it makes sense that the scientists were using observation to understand the world.
This is the humanist idea in action. They stopped just debating what ancient authorities wrote. They started saying, okay, let's test this. Let's do an experiment and see what actually happens. That's the beginning of the modern scientific method.
And that led to some discoveries that really shook things up.
Definitely. Take astronomy. Scientists started using new tools, like the telescope, and they realized something pretty terrifying for the time.
Which was?
That the Earth was not the center of the universe. For centuries, everyone believed in the geocentric model, that everything revolved around us. But scientists like Copernicus proposed a heliocentric model, with the sun at the center.
That must have been a dangerous idea to promote.
Oh, it was a huge deal. It challenged not just science, but religious and political authority.
Yeah.
And down on Earth, doctors were making just as radical discoveries.
With the human body.
Yes. They started performing dissections and creating the first really accurate diagrams of human organs, the heart, the lungs. It was the foundation for modern medicine.
So while the scientists are looking inward and upward, you have explorers looking outward, across the oceans.
Right. And it was all connected. Europeans wanted to find new trade routes to Asia and Africa to get access to things like spices, silk, and gold.
But to do that, you need better tools for navigating.
You do. And they had them. They used the magnetic compass for direction and the astrolabe, which helped them figure out their latitude by looking at the stars. These tools let them sail across the open ocean, far from land.
Which, of course, led them to the Americas.
And that just changed the map of the world overnight. It created a truly global economy with ships and goods crossing the oceans. But we have to remember, while it brought enormous wealth to Europe, it had a devastating impact on the people who already lived in those lands.
Right. So let's talk about that for a second. What was daily life actually like for most people during the Renaissance? It wasn't all art and science, was it?
Not at all. The vast majority of people were still farmers, living in the countryside. Life in the cities was growing, but it was crowded, it was noisy. You'd work as a craftsman or a shopkeeper.
And the gap between the rich and the poor was pretty obvious.
It was enormous. The rich lived in these huge stone palaces, and their clothing was a billboard for their wealth.
How so?
They wore bright, expensive fabrics, silk, velvet covered in embroidery, and heavy gold jewelry. The poor, on the other hand, wore simple undyed wool or linen. You knew someone's social status just by looking at them.
And that wealth also paid for an education.
Yes, education became incredibly important for the ruling class. Universities grew, they offered more subjects. The goal was to create that Renaissance man we talked about, someone who knew about everything.
And did women get educated too?
Some noble women did, yes.
Yeah.
They received a very high-level education, which was a big change, though their opportunities to actually use it in a career were still very limited.
And all of these educated people created a new audience for books and plays,
A huge one. And writers like William Shakespeare started writing in the language people actually spoke, in English, not just Latin.
which meant everyone could understand it.
Everyone. He wrote about universal things, love, jealousy, ambition, and his plays were performed in these big wooden theaters for both the rich and the poor. It was entertainment for everybody.
And what about the music? What did the Renaissance sound like?
Music was everywhere, in church, in homes, and we saw a bunch of new instruments become popular.
Like what?
Well, the lute, which is sort of a pear-shaped guitar, was the instrument almost everyone had at home. The recorder, kind of wooden flute, was also really common.
And keyboards started to appear, right?
They did. The harpsichord was invented, which looks like a piano, but it plucks the strings instead of hitting them. And you had early trombones called sackbuts. The printing press was huge here, too, because you could print sheet music and share songs all over Europe.
So when you pull it all together, from the philosophy to the technology to the art, what's the big picture?
I think at its core, the Renaissance was a time defined by a renewed belief in what humans could achieve. It was the realization that knowledge was a powerful tool you could share. By looking back to the past and looking forward with science, they completely changed. Well, everything.
And I guess the thought to leave you with is this. Every time you value critical thinking, every time you look for evidence, instead of just accepting an answer, you're tapping into that legacy of humanism. It's a challenge to use your own observations to understand the world.
That's it.
We'll see you next time.